Hi, I'm Neil Snyder. Thanks for joining me for another Snyder Talk video commentary. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about the problems in the Middle East that most people don't understand because they're not familiar with history, especially history in the Middle East. When Nasser was president of Egypt, he said that all of the land between the Atlantic and the Persian Gulf was Arab land. And that's what he meant. In the minds of Arab peoples, they see not nations, the Arab nations that we typically recognize today, were drawn up by Europeans, primarily the British. There were no borders in the Arab world. There were tribes. And they regard that land as Arab land. They refer to it as the Pan-Arab nation or the Arab nation. You can't understand the Middle East peace process unless you realize that the Arabs see the Jews as interlopers. They see them as people who are homesteading on their land. And they're not talking about settlements in Jerusalem or in the West Bank. They're talking about any activity at all in the Middle East today that we call Israel. Anything the Jews do there is regarded as an affront to the Arab people because they're doing it on Arab land in the minds of the Arabs. A good place to start if you want to understand the history of the Middle East is this book by Joan Peters. The title of it is From Time Immemorial. I want to read you the first paragraph in this book because it explains what she was about when she started writing it, and it also helps you to understand what what the book eventually came to be. Peters writes, "It was not until this book was well underway that I reluctantly confronted the historical factors underlying the Palestinian problem. The book was originally meant to be solely an investigation of the current plight of the Arab refugees, as that subject was then still generally known." It might also help you to hear one paragraph from the dust cover. Joan Peters also unfolds a historical record to shatter the widely held belief that Arabs and Jews harmoniously coexisted for centuries in the Arab world. The fact is that the Jews, along with other non-Muslims, were second-class citizens, oppressed in the Muslim world for more than a millennium. And this continuing prejudicial tradition of hostility underlies as well every Arab action toward the State of Israel. Peters is right on the money. As she points out in the opening paragraph of her book, she didn't start out with that attitude, but when she studied the facts, she came to the realization that the problem in the Middle East is not the Jews, it's not Israel, it's the Arabs. I'm going to read a few paragraphs from this book to you, and hopefully it'll help you understand some of the problem. This program was reviewed in 1991 by Mohammed Heikel, then still an important spokesman of Egypt's leadership in his post as editor of the influential semi-official newspaper El Haram. Heikel called for a change of Arab rhetoric, no more threats of drowning Israel in the sea, and a new political strategy aimed at reducing Israel to indefensible borders and pushing her into diplomatic and economic isolation. He predicted that total withdrawal would pass sentence on the entire state of Israel. Until 1967, and the Six-Day War in 1967, the Arabs were committed to driving Israel out of the Middle East altogether, or as they said, drive the Jews into the sea. But the Six-Day War taught them a lesson that they didn't forget, and that is they can't defeat Israel militarily. So instead of fighting them on the battlefield, they decided to engage them in a different way. They decided to engage Israel in a propaganda war, and in effect paint Israel as the Goliath in the Middle East, not as the David. And they said that that would cause the world to pass sentence on Israel, and they've been absolutely correct. Israel today is regarded as the Goliath in the Middle East and the big bully, the 800-pound gorilla. And the Arab nations that surround Israel are regarded as the victims. Well, the truth is there are only roughly 7 million Jews in Israel today. She's surrounded by more than 300 million Arab Muslims. Israel is a tiny sliver of a nation surrounded by millions of square miles of Arab land. There's so much that you need to know about history in the Middle East. And hopefully over the next several days, as I talk about this issue in Snyder Talk commentaries, you'll become enlightened. The title of this Snyder Talk commentary is Beyond Rhetoric. Arabs don't want Jews on their land. There's no question about that. They regard all of the Middle East, in fact more than the Middle East, it includes all of North Africa, all of that land is theirs, and they regard anyone on that land who isn't not just Muslim, but Arab Muslim, as an interloper, an unwanted guest, a trespasser. There is no peace process that can resolve that issue, that can take care of that problem, because there will always remain in the Arab world a minority who believe that there should be no Israel, and they believe strongly in killing Jews, Christians too for that matter. But the point is, any peace treaty that's reached, no matter how good it looks on paper, can't effectively deal with these people. And these people will continue to be a problem for Israel so long as the nation Israel exists. It's interesting because if you know the Bible, you know that this falls directly in line with Scripture. There will be no peace in the Middle East. And beyond all the rhetoric that you hear, the Arabs really don't want there to be any Israel at all. They want Israel destroyed. Thank you for joining me for another Snyder Talk video commentary, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.